Our fascination with horror stories is nothing new. Since time immemorial, men have sat around the fires, telling tales of the strange and horrific, to thrill, scare and excite. The story I'll be telling you today is very old. It was written down in the Middle Ages and takes place at the height of the Viking Age, when Iceland was first settled by the Norse, and how a young colony was haunted by the ghost of Torolf Halt-Foot, Baiggifot. Our story takes us to western Iceland, on the peninsula of Torsnes. Turof was a great Viking, and a late arrival to Iceland. He had come here to join his mother, who had moved there a few years prior. But Torolf found his mother's estate too small, and wished to expand it. His plan was to duel an old and childless man named Ulfar and so inherit his considerable property. Ulfar refused to give in to the Viking, and the two met in Holmgang. Despite Ulfar's age, he put up a fierce fight. Whilst he was eventually defeated, Turof was wounded in the leg and would walk with a limp for the rest of his days. He'd forever be known as Torolf Halt-Foot, Baiggifot. Having won the duel, Turof seized Ulfar's property. The old man was given a small piece of land to live out his days on, and Baiggifot went on to have a son and 2 daughters. Baiggifot was one of the men who defended the Thing at Torsnes, when the Kellings came there to, well, take a dump. If that story sounds bizarre, I've covered it extensively in its own separate video. The years went by. As Turof turned old, he became bitter, argumentative, and easily angered. The relationship between him and his son, Arnkill, soured. In one incident, Turof stole hay from one of his tenants. The tenant pleaded to Arnkill for assistance, and Arnkill for his father to pay for the hay. Turof refused, saying that the tenant had enough money, and that he wouldn't pay before he actually suffered. Arnkill ended up paying for the hay. Naturally, his father refused to compensate his son, and Arnkill ended up taking 7 oxes and butchering them. Turof was furious. He blamed everything on the tenant, and said he'd pay dearly. That winter, Torolf Baiggifot was hosting a great party. All of his thralls had been invited, and they were very drunk. Baiggifot promised that he'd free them if they go down and burn his tenant alive. Arnkill happened to be drinking in the vicinity. He and his buddies spotted the thralls as they were setting the fire. Arnkill had the fire extinguished and the thralls arrested. He had them all hanged, and the tenant entrusted his entire property to Arnkill, who became his new protector. Again, Baiggifot was furious, and demanded his son pay a compensation for the thralls. Arnkill refused. Baiggifot tried next to seek help from the powerful chieftain, Snorri Gode. In the beginning, Snorri refused to help the angry old man against his own son, but complied in the end when he was given a large forest that Baiggifot owned. As summer came, Arnkill was taken to court. Though Snorri had a sharp tongue, Arnkill defended his case skillfully, and in the end was only made to pay a small fine. Both Arnkill and Snorri were displeased with the outcome, but most displeased was Torolf Baiggifot. The back and forth conflicts continued for some while. Torolf had the tenant assassinated, but was never made to pay. He later tried to have Arnkill help him get the forest back from Snorri, after Snorri began cutting it down. Though Arnkill greeted his old man warmly, despite everything that had happened, he refused to further risk his relationship with the powerful chieftain. So that evening, he returned home bitter as ever, and he refused to speak to anyone. He sat down on his throne and didn't eat a bite. When everyone went to sleep, he stayed up. When they woke up the next morning, he was still in his chair. Torolf Baiggifot was dead. The servants considered this an ill omen and were terrified. Arnkill was immediately summoned and arrived post-haste with his housecarls. He told everyone to stay away from the old man before his eyes and mouth had been shut. Then he came up on the corpse from behind, took him by the shoulders, and used all his strength to get him from the throne. He wrapped his father in cloth, broke open a hole in the wall, and pulled him through. Torolf Baiggifot was taken to a valley not far from his home, and buried inside a cairn. It was now that these spooky things began occurring. People were afraid to go outside after sundown. As summer went by, people believed that Torolf wasn't sleeping. No one felt safe at night. The oxen that had pulled Torolf to his cairn went mad. All the animals that went close to his grave turned mad and screamed until they died. The local shepherd fled home many times, having been chased away by Torolf. One day in autumn, neither shepherd nor sheep returned home. In the morning, people went out to look for them. All the animals were missing or found dead. Turof's cairn was surrounded by dead birds. Any winged animal that landed on those stones fell dead immediately. As for the shepherd, they found him not far away from the cairn. He was cold and dead. His flesh and skin had turned black as coal, and every bone in his body was broken. He was buried next to Thorolf. No one dared letting their cattle graze in the valley. People in the area often heard loud banging at night. They thought they could see someone sitting astride on the roof of the longhouse. When winter came, Turof returned home. He harassed the people living there, especially the lady of the house. I'm not sure if this was his widow. They suffered greatly, and she nearly went insane. Soon after, she died. Her body was likewise taken to the cairn and buried next to her husband. People left Turolf's old farm. He now began haunting the valley proper, and every farm in the area was deserted. Some were forced to flee, others killed by his hand. All who fell were later seen, walking together with Turof. The winter was cold and howled outside the longhouses. Even if people had errands, they dared not leave their homes, in fear of Turof and his hauntings. It had caused a lot of misery, and people meant that it was Arnkill's responsibility to resolve it. Arnkill offered respite in his home to anyone that desired, as he was never bothered by the undead. Winter became spring, and when the snow had thawed, Arnkill sent word for another clan to come and help him bring his father out of the grave, as they were legally permitted to do so. They refused, saying it was not their responsibility to do so. Arnkill responded that it was necessary that they did as the law demanded, and that they had no right to refuse. To this, they accepted, and 12 men arrived at Arnkill's farm with draft animals and digging tools. They traveled to the cairn and broke it open. The saga described Turolf's corpse as completely unblemished since death, and I quote, "He was horrible to witness." What the writer meant by this, I do not know, and perhaps I do not want to. They took Torolf Baiggifot out of the cairn, put him in a sleigh, and took him into the mountains. Arnkill intended for his father to be buried high up, but the oxes pulling the sleigh went mad and escaped. Turof was now so heavy that no man could carry him very far. They moved him to a small hill nearby and had him buried there. This place was afterwards known as Baiggifot's Höfti, Halt-Foot height. Arnkill raised a wall around the height and over the mound, so high that no one but the birds could scale it. In the days that the saga was written down, the author alleged that you could still see the remnants of it. Maybe it still remains to this day, I don't know. Here Turof would rest, as long as Arnkill lived. However, Turof would continually haunt the hillside, and no one dared to approach. Snorri cut down the entirety of the forest. People noticed Arnkill's displeasure over this, as he believed his father had robbed him of his inheritance by giving that forest to Snorri. One of Snorri's thralls tried assassinating Arnkill without success. Snorri and Arnkill went at it in court without success either, and a great rivalry was brooding between them. Arnkill had a tendency of transporting hay at night, since his thralls were usually busy with other duties during the day. One winter night, when he and his thralls were working under the moonlight, they were attacked by Snorri and his men. As Arnkill saw the 9 warriors approaching, he sent one of the thralls away to get help. That man panicked, ran into a stream and drowned. The stream was then named after him. The other thrall was sent into the barn, and he was distracted by other duties and just forgot. Arnkill had to fend for himself. He tore the runner off his sleigh and pulled it inside a corral, where he meant to make a stand. Few words were exchanged. Snorri's men threw javelins at Arnkill, and though he fended them off with the runner, one wounded him. When Snorri's men ran out of missiles, they charged. Arnkill defended himself with his sword and shield. After sustaining many wounds, the son of Thorolf fell, and Snorri's men buried him in a haystack. When the thralls had finished with their duties, they went to sleep and woke up Arnkill's followers. They asked where their master was. It was as if the thrall had woken from a slumber. "That's right," he said. "He's probably fighting Snorri." They ran there as fast as they could, but by then it was too late. Arnkill had been much esteemed in heathen times. Many men envied him. He was a brave fighter and a sharp tongue at court. His body was buried next to a lake, and his mound was as tall as a haystack. Snorri's power would only grow with the years, and he'd enter history as one of Iceland's most prominent figures. However, this would not be the conclusion of supernatural events, neither for Iceland nor for Snorri. But that story I will leave for next year's Halloween.
Huge thanks to Bradley Roder, my first supporter on Patreon. If you want to support the channel, please check out the links to PayPal and Patreon in the video description. Otherwise, boost the algorithm by giving the video a like and a comment, and sharing it with a friend. Cheers!